Yes, good morning. Welcome, everybody. My name's Steve Pierce. I'm head of sales here for TJC. I've also got a colleague of mine supporting me today, Ruben Venter. He's one of our senior consultants, and he'll be supporting me mostly with the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So this is actually the second presentation we've done this week. Yesterday, we presented a much more niche topic around the sort of energy savings that can be attributed to managing data and archiving, and also sort of hitting those sustainability targets in your business. Today, we're going to focus more on sort of traditional data archiving, what you should do to prepare to move to S/4HANA, and the importance of ILM, so information lifecycle management, for controlling that rate of data growth over time. So I'm just going to kill the camera for now, so we can all concentrate on the presentation. Let's just, there we are, that's excellent. Okay, so I mean, this is the first time, or certainly this week is the first time we've presented to VNSG. So for those of you that aren't familiar with TJC, we've been helping companies manage their data volumes in SAP for almost 25 years now. Worldwide, we've helped more than 500 companies with archiving and decommissioning legacy systems. And we're SAP partners, of course, and all of our software solutions are SAP certified. So we specialize in data archiving, so that's true data volume management and implementing best practices to control that data growth over time. GDPR, well, that's true information lifecycle management. That's applying deletion rules to records to comply with personal data regulations. We'll be looking at that in detail today. Legacy systems, so decommissioning your old legacy systems. Again, that's a subject on the agenda today. And tax and audit, so that's data extraction tools for getting the right information at the right time and in the right format for tax and audit submissions. So that's nice and quick, an introduction to TJC. In this session, we'll be looking at data archiving, but this is for companies who are preparing for the migration to S/4HANA, maybe already on S4 and are looking to rationalize their data environment and implement best practices. And also those people who are still undecided about S4, but they're looking to sort of adopt best practice before they move to whatever ERP they'll end up on in the end. I'm also going to present a case study on British Telecom. That's one of our largest customers in the UK. We'll look at the challenges they overcame when they were archiving to HANA Enterprise Cloud, the HEC, and also their plans for S4 moving forward. We're going to look at the balance between data retention requirements driven by industry regulations and the deletion requirements of regulations like GDPR. Then we'll look at the benefits of an ILM strategy from a data management, compliance, and GDPR perspective. And finally, we'll look at decommissioning legacy systems and why that's a more important part of your overall data management strategy than maybe you realize. So there's a lot to fit in today. So let's get going. So to kick off with, Harry, if you can step in here. To kick off with, we've got a couple of quick polls, and this is just to help me understand where the audience today is in terms of their situation with S/4HANA, their plans to move to S/4HANA, and also if you haven't moved to S/4HANA yet, when those plans might be. So again, it may be that you haven't actually made the decision yet, and you're still on ECC. You're not sure whether you're going to stick with SAP. Hopefully you will. But really, this is just to gauge where the audience might be with that.
Got around 2/3
okay,
of the votes in.
So again, Harry, I can't actually see the poll. So if we've got some results there and you could read them out, that'd be really useful.
Yes, I can. 62% is still in the planning phase to move to S/4HANA. 31% is already on, and 8% doesn't know.
Okay, that's great. And what about the dates, part 2 of that, Harry? When are people
thinking
they're going to move?
The second poll, you mean?
Yes, the second poll, yeah.
Then I need to open that one first. So let me do that.
My apologies.
No problem.
Yeah, unfortunately, I with me presenting full screen, I can't actually see the poll on the screen. But I have to say, just while Harry's having a look at that, it's not a great surprise at all that that 60% of people are still in the planning phase. We find that it doesn't seem to matter which country we're talking to, which user group we're talking to. The majority and sometimes the vast majority are still either in the planning phase or some haven't even sort of put it on the agenda yet, because they think, well, you know, we've got until 2030, we've got plenty of time. But you know, it takes time to make a decision to select an ERP, and then of course it takes time to do the project itself. So I think over the next couple of years, certainly we as a company are going to see a lot more activity with our customers who are doing that migration to S4.
Have the results on the screen, Steve?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I can't see that because I've got the.
Let me follow that for you. It's 56% that's intending to move before 2023, 25% by 2025. So I think that's the vast majority, and then there's 6% planning on beyond 2025, and 30% is the do not know phase.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. So actually, that's great. So most of you that are in the planning phase are actually in the advanced planning phase, and actually scheduled that in to happen. So believe me, I'll change what I said before now. You guys are actually ahead of the curve by some distance. I mean, we've spoken to other user groups where maybe, you know, only 20 or 30% are looking to do it in the next couple of years, and the vast majority are somewhere between 2025 and 2030. So thank you very much for your input. That's very, very interesting. Let's kick on with this because we have got quite a lot to get through. Okay, so just what are the key drivers then for investing in data archiving and ILM in the first place? The main benefit of archiving is simply the cost of storing all of that data. It's memory cost, and how those costs will grow rapidly if you don't have a strategy in place to control that data growth. The hidden benefits are system performance and the ability to reduce migration times, reduce backup times, and restore times. And of course, GDPR, it's a big project, a big topic, should I say, for everybody. Archiving, and particularly ILM, can help you to remain compliant and avoid those fines and penalties by managing retention policies and automating the deletion of that sensitive data, that personal data. We'll be looking at retention policies in a few minutes. And even energy consumption, by reducing the server landscape in your business, it will make a difference to your bottom line. So you can see there are lots of reasons why you should look at data archiving across your SAP landscape. And we've got a really good example today when we look at British Telecom and understand how they've been benefited over the last 5 years, because it's a number of things they've benefited from, not just sort of saving on memory costs. So even though this slide reiterates some of those main advantages of archiving we've spoken about, we're going to focus on the left-hand column here to highlight some of the issues that your business might be facing right now. So system performance, it's something that's often intangible until you've made improvements and you can do those before and after comparisons. And it's only at that point you can really see the difference with system performance. Less data, of course, means migration times, backup times, restore times, they're all going to be improved. And controlling that growth of data also means you can opt for the right license for your business. Now we'll look at data volume growth in the next slide, but this is always going to be the primary reason for companies to implement archiving and ILM in the first place. And of course, structured archiving, it can help from a GDPR perspective as well. So we mentioned that in the previous slide, of course. So this is an interesting slide. This is a real life example taken from one of our automotive customers recently. And let me just get my pointer. Now they had serious issues. So they had 18 terabytes of data, and they have 4 terabytes per year of data growth. So this was getting really out of control for them. Now they moved to AWS at this point here, earlier this year, and they saw a really healthy data compression of 9 terabytes. At that point, they analyzed the effect of taking 50% of that data out of the system, and they found that there was a 65% increase in operational performance. And it was this that was the catalyst for moving forward with an archiving project. Now you can see from this graph that with a yearly growth of 4 terabytes, if they do nothing at all, if they just accept that 9 terabytes is a good result and they do no archiving, within a couple of years, they're going to be right back to where they started. And they saw this, and that analysis was what made archiving and ILM a real priority with their business. And the difference when we look at a graph like this between archiving and ILM is that archiving, effectively, you can see it as a standalone project there. ILM is controlling the growth of data over time. And it's a really important distinction, that, and it's very important to understand that data archiving is not about just a single standalone project that you might do. It's about ongoing archiving and managing that growth of data, because some industries, retail, automotive in this case, they have huge amounts of transactional data, and the data grows very, very quickly indeed. So on to the case study for British Telecom then. We'll start with BT's problem statement. Now, BT have been very good with us. They've presented for us at user groups, and these slides are actually from their own presentation. So to start with, the EU GDPR regulations were looming, which of course includes strict rules for personal data. But BT had a number of information policies of their own, and they weren't implementing any of those either. Now, as a result, they were seeing significant growth of data across their business. And in fact, their data just in ECC had grown beyond 15 terabytes at the time that we started talking to them. This resulted in performance issues. The more data you have, particularly in the old Oracle systems that BT were running, the slower your system is going to run. And BT also had major constraints with how much storage and processing power they had, because they were on outdated legacy platform and in a data center that was actually being closed by their infrastructure partner. So a combination of these two things meant they had a number of issues: constraints on the computer and power storage, as well as increasing amounts of data. And on top of that, of course, the issue with GDPR. And I mentioned the data center they were in was being closed by their infrastructure partner. Now, the challenge here is, as we've said, the more data you have, the more time it takes to transfer that data. So BT couldn't afford to have the system down for more than a single weekend to transfer to a new data center. And it was that really focused their mind on reducing the size of their data environment. On top of that, they wanted to deploy Unicode, which was just one more challenge. And finally, on top of all of that, they were looking to consolidate 2 SAP instances. So they had one from the legacy Orange UK mobile business, and they had one from the legacy T-Mobile mobile phone business, and they wanted to get that down to a single instance. So BT had all sorts of problems, and all of that pointed towards getting their data under control. So initially, TJC performed an expertise for BT. Now, in our language, an expertise is a full system analysis where you look at the largest and fastest growing tables and objects, and we identify those so you can prioritize objects that give you quick wins. That makes perfect sense. BT also wanted a GDPR expertise for all objects containing personal data. Now, this included a lot of the smaller tables that may not have been picked up in the previous expertise. The smaller objects that were further down the priority list in terms of volume, but for GDPR, they needed to identify them and make sure that the right rules were implemented. They got some quick wins by automating technical data. That took a few terabytes of data out of the system. And the next stage was actually a lot harder for them, and that was engaging with business colleagues. And it was surprisingly difficult for BT, and it took BT by surprise as well. ILM means applying deletion rules to data and deleting after a period of time. It doesn't mean moving it to somewhere else, but purging that data from the system. And that took some serious effort to get buy-in from the business. And by automating archiving for business data as well as for technical data, they made other gains. And next was to get their business guys to test. So not only getting rid of the data they needed to in line with their own retention policies, but testing as well. That was a really important step. They had to get that right because they had to give the business confidence that the data would be safe. And the final step for BT is looking at SAP BW. So that was delayed, and they're only doing that at the moment ahead of the migration to S4 HANA next year. And after BT migrate to S4 and BW4 in 2022, at that point, they'll start looking at decommissioning their old ECC systems with us. So what did BT actually achieve then? Obviously, we're doing ongoing archiving projects with them, so it wasn't just a single point in time that we work with them. We work with them every year. They implemented and automated their data retention policies. They saw immediate data reduction, so 6 terabytes were deleted during the project, and more has been done since. The performance improved significantly once that initial archiving was done. They deployed Unicode successfully, and they enjoyed moving their data center so much that they actually moved for a second time. And the second time they moved to the HEC, the HANA Enterprise Cloud. And finally, they consolidated those 2 ECC6 applications, which are now on a single SAP instance. And the results on the right-hand side show the approximate savings they made overall. Now, obviously, we do work with them year after year. They've archived more since, but this is a snapshot of what their savings were with the initial project. So an important point here, just to finish this slide off, if you're going to host your own systems on HANA, you need to get that data under control because the storage costs can get very, very high. Even though the performance is significantly better on HANA, the storage costs alone are something that your financial director is going to want you to keep on top of. So in terms of takeaways for this section, BT have got great project teams and they've got lots of experience with SAP. What BT didn't have was archiving expertise, and that's what TJC brought to the table. So to work effectively, it needed to be a true partnership. So the BT technical teams that understood the applications, the TJC team who understood archiving, and of course the BT business teams who understood their own data. Automation was, or made the biggest difference of all. Support teams at BT were spending many hours a week before the archiving processes were automated. And now that archiving just runs in the background. Getting agreement to purge the data, that was a really tough task for BT. And if you haven't been through that before, you shouldn't really underestimate it as part of the journey. And establishing data ownership can actually be more complex than it first appears, especially if you've got large, complex ECC suites. So there can easily be different authorities with different functional areas of SAP. So you need to find out who that data owner is. And finally, testing. So you need to be confident that it's working correctly, as deleting your data, make no mistake, is a one-way journey. So the business have got to be confident that they haven't lost anything they need to keep, which means anything with sensitive or personal data. And you also got to make sure that it's not impacted any of the systems that you're integrated with, or any of the processes in your applications. Okay, so we've got a short section now on residence and retention. I do apologise if this is too high level, but I think it's important to just sort of fit this in because the context is right with this presentation. Excuse me. So here we've got a diagram that makes the distinction between residence and retention periods. So residence periods is the amount of time the data resides on the live SAP database before being archived. The retention period is the total length of time that data is available to be displayed from an SAP system. And that's whether it's live or whether it's archived data. And the ILM rules applied to the final destruction of data can either be driven by regulatory requirements, or it can just be a sensible period of time when the data is no longer required for audit or legal purposes. And that's demonstrated by this grey line. So you can see here that once the data is archived at this point, it may be needed for audit or legal purposes over time, but once that requirement falls away after a sensible period of time, then it can be deleted when appropriate, of course. Now, there will always be growth in your live data environment, and therefore there'll be growth in your archive data as well. The trick, like I said right back at the beginning, is to control that growth of data through ILM. And this slide demonstrates the impact of doing no archiving at all and the benefit of adopting the right retention policies for your data across the business. So these are real figures from one of our clients. It's actually the same client that you saw the graph for a few slides ago. So starting here with 9 terabytes of data, if you remember, when they went onto AWS. So, and you can see the impact the business is going to have if they put no measures in place to control that growth of data. If you remember, the growth of data was 4 terabytes a year. The blue line, you can see the projected growth without archiving at all. The gray line, you can see where they'll be if they archive up to 5 years. And the orange line, you can see when they archive up to 3 years. That's what many companies sort of tend to adopt. This is really just to sort of drive home this fact that controlling that growth of data over a period of time, that's the reason for investing in ILM. And with the cost of memory, both in HANA and AWS, you know, that can make significant year-on-year savings, quite apart from the benefits of you know, operating the system and efficiency in the system. So companies can archive data and documents by individual company codes as well, and that's regardless of which country that company is in. Really, we're talking here about companies that have multinational operations. So by doing this, different retention and residence periods can be set up to help you manage data specific to the legislations and requirements for whatever country you're in. So many of TJC customers are set up this way, and it's a little bit busy on the right-hand side there, but you can see from these workflows that you can either archive per object and choose whether to archive permanently or not. You can set ILM rules to archive and then delete after a period of time, so you can automate that process. Or of course, there's always the option of deleting immediately. So if you don't automate your processes, there's a danger that people could stop doing manual tasks properly, and over time that could mean that the company is no longer going to be compliant. So by automating, by introducing software to automate these processes, you can take that human error out of the equation, which is, again, it's something that's not always considered, but it's certainly something worth knowing. So let's take a look at the importance of archiving an ILM in just a little more detail. So it's worth starting, I think, just by looking at a couple of definitions. A data governance framework, which all companies have, it helps establish policies for who can access and use data, the processes around data storage and retention, managing those business risks associated with storing sensitive and personal data. Data management executes those processes that support the data governance policies, and that's for the whole life cycle of the data. And you can see here that archiving and ILM are a key part of that data management process, dealing specifically with completed data and managing those deletion and data retention policies. So that would include the need to delete personal data or personal information and comply with local laws and regulations, depending on where your company has its operations around the world. And it's worth knowing, by the way, there are now 61 countries in the world who have their own privacy regulations. So it's particularly important for those multinational organizations because it goes beyond the GDPR regulations that we're familiar with, and actually 61 countries have their own take on that topic. So when considering an archiving and data management strategy, you need to ensure that you're able to answer these questions in relation to your data. So you need to ensure that you can provide context to the data 5, 6, or 7 years down the line, or for as long as that data is needed. It's important to be able to know when the data was created and how long that data should be held for. That's where ILM comes in. You need to know where the data resides and how to access that data in case you are required to provide evidence for compliance, for example. Permission-based user access, that's essential when you're handling personal information, even if that data is archived. And finally, data management policies must manage potentially conflicting regulations. You know, I spoke about those 61 countries having their own regulations, but it's also things like, for example, GDPR has a right to be forgotten regulation. But if you can compare that to the need to keep data for research purposes, for example, there's a conflict there. One is saying that you should delete, the other is saying that you should retain. So it's about managing those type of things as well. Now, I've borrowed this image from SAP, so you may have seen something very similar to this before, but it gives a perfect overview of the typical journey a company might take when they're adopting a data archiving strategy. Now, in an ideal world, you'd go straight to an ILM program and not just have a standalone data archiving program. But the main driver and the primary reason for many companies to adopt archiving for the first time is simply those rising costs of storage. And of course, the other hot topic's GDPR, and again, ILM fits in with that. And once that mature archiving program's in place, and especially if the company has migrated to S/4HANA, then you look at a program of decommissioning, and that can be both SAP and non-SAP legacy systems. We're going to be looking at decommissioning in a few minutes, so I won't go into too much detail with that. Now, here we can see the main challenges that every single business faces when managing information. So large data volume growth, especially in high transaction businesses like retail, manufacturing, telecoms, complex system landscapes, so multi-site, multi-country organizations that have grown through acquisition, and maybe they've inherited systems along the way, staying compliant when managing personal data, having to live with outdated processes and old systems, keeping up with changes in global regulations. So a really robust ILM strategy across the whole business will address each and every one of these issues. And to get the best out of your investment, it can't be a one-off standalone project. It has to be an ongoing ILM strategy. And that leads us nicely to the last slide of this section. Here we can see how the challenges on the previous slide can be addressed through that implementation of ILM. So the finance team will be happy because you'll meet compliance and audit requirements. The IT team will be very happy because you'll have reduced that system complexity, so less resources and less cost to manage that IT environment. And even the sustainability manager is going to be happy because the company is going to be using less hardware and less energy potentially. Okay, so we're going into the final section of the presentation today, and I've got the second and, well, actually the third, I suppose, and final poll of the session. So, Harry, can I just ask you to open that for me, and perhaps we'll give everybody 30 seconds or so to have a look at that.
Just open.
Thank you very much. Lovely, thank you. So yes, this is really to just gauge whether the audience is planning to retain legacy systems, and companies do. You know, companies figure that if they don't have very large legacy systems and they're not causing issues, they don't see the value of paying for a project to decommission them. Maybe you're planning to decommission, but by the look of it, the majority of you are certainly well into the process of migrating to S/4HANA, so perhaps it's sort of less of a priority. Maybe you've already decommissioned your systems, and if you have, then we definitely applaud you because you're very much ahead of the curve. And the last one, and I have to say the last one is usually the one where the most people are at. You're just not sure at the moment, so decommissioning may not have actually been discussed at this point. Okay, so Harry, are you able to
yes, I am.
those results out?
So it's on the screen right now, but 8% is planning to retain, 50% is planning to decommission, 8% has already decommissioned, and a third is still in doubt. Not sure.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. I tell you what, that's actually the fact that half of you are planning to decommission is fantastic, because what that means is that it's already been discussed. It may not be on the agenda yet, but certainly you're aware that that's the next natural step for the business to do once they've archived and migrated to S4HANA. So fantastic. Thank you very much for your input with the polls today. Very much appreciate that. So legacy system decommissioning then. Well, in its simple or simplest form, a legacy system is any system that no longer retains current or active business data for day-to-day transactions. So these systems are often on obsolete, unsupported platforms, and even those systems that are supported are getting more expensive every year to retain. So this will certainly be the case with ECC once we get beyond 2030. SAP are likely to charge a premium for ongoing support at this time, if they offer support at all, of course. And this takes us on to why legacy systems are in scope and why decommissioning should be part of your overall data management strategy. So the main reason is that you have to keep that data for compliance and regulatory reasons. So there can be no question of just switching off the system. The problem stems from there being more than one regulation, of course, to comply with, and different regulations will naturally apply to different types of data as well. And especially with multinational companies dealing with rules and regulations in different countries. And the fines for non-compliance, of course, can be huge. And there's also sort of hidden potential cost to the business. So if you are fined, that can obviously damage your brand, your reputation, and ultimately, potentially, your share price. Now, I borrowed these statistics from a blog that I read recently, and the analysis they did was with UK-based companies, but it's relevant for all businesses, really. What they found was an average of 31% of an organization's technology is made up of legacy systems. But on average, a company was spending 70% of their IT budget maintaining that 31% of legacy systems. 90% of businesses felt they were held back in terms of growth and efficiency due to the old technology that they're having to live with day by day. And half of senior IT leaders stated that legacy systems are the main barrier to digital transformation, so blocking the organization's progress moving forward. And apart from the obvious financial aspects of maintaining old systems, there are other costs to the businesses if old technology is not managed or replaced. So old inefficient technology affects productivity. So that's just as relevant for old IT systems as it would be for old production equipment, for example. From a security perspective, old systems leave businesses more vulnerable to security threats. Businesses who are running a number of separate legacy systems, they can struggle with the lack of centralized data. We'll look at this in the next couple of slides. And legacy systems are often limited. So this inflexibility hinders innovation, it hinders business growth. So purely in terms of the running cost of legacy systems versus the cost of retaining that same data in a cloud-based legacy application, the differences can be huge. The obvious savings are from software and system licensing, as well as support from the ERP vendors. Typically for each legacy system, you'll need to make sure you retain expertise within the business to support those systems, and some of those systems are going to be 20 or more years old. The software vendor might not be willing to support the systems anymore. And if they are, they'll probably put the cost up year after year to provide that support. And then there's the admin costs and of simply having more systems in your landscape than you need. And on top of all of this, there are things like running reports across different systems to extract data and having to maintain old customizations and integrations. So all sorts of operations, all sorts of problems that you can have with managing operations on those systems. So you can see the sensible thing in the long term, and actually looking at the poll that you guys have just filled in, you're well aware of this generally, but the thing in the long term is to put together a program of decommissioning those systems. And depending on the type of system we're talking about, you should expect to save 70 or 80% on the bottom line cost of retaining those systems. And it's important to note that even though when you decommission, the applications will be lost, the data and 100% of the data remains available in that secure cloud repository. So this is the very last slide. Thank you very much for your patience. I've got a screenshot here just to demonstrate how easy it would be to recover that information. I mentioned that 100% of the data is extracted and archived once you decommission. So this is a screenshot of our ELSA application, and it just demonstrates how easy it is to search for that legacy data alongside the live and archived data. So remember, even though your applications are lost, you retain 100% of that data. So once everything is uploaded into the application, you can do one search to look across the whole data environment. So in this case, we're searching for sales documents in the range that you can see on the screen, and then you can display results from your live system, from your decommissioned system, there's ELSA that we spoke about, as well as from any other archives where that data resides. So again, once it's decommissioned, it's very, very easy to recover that, and there'll be a full audit trail behind it. And of course, once it's archived or decommissioned, it's also time-stamped as well. So a final thought for the presentation: decommissioning is actually easier to implement than ILM, and you can reduce that overall archiving and ILM project cost by decommissioning legacy systems first. So obviously we're not talking about moving from ECC to S/4HANA, because clearly you can't decommission ECC until you've moved. But the fact is that, you know, when you're doing an ERP move, you may already have lots of inherited systems, lots of legacy systems that it's worth looking at from a decommissioning point of view. So there was a lot to pack in today. Thank you very much for your time. I know a copy of the presentation is going to be made available after the event. My contact details are on the screen, and Ruben's with me to take any technical questions that you may have. So thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, maybe before, I didn't see any questions coming in yet, so let me point out to the audience that in your GoToWebinar panel, there is a section that is called questions, where you can type in your questions so that Steve, Ruben, and myself can see them, and well, Steve and Ruben can answer them. And while you're typing the questions, let me also point out that after this webinar, there will be a 2-question poll, which hopefully you're all going to fill out, which allows VNSG to improve the sessions going forward. So already, thank you for filling out the poll. I do see some questions coming in. I'm not sure if you guys can see them.
No, not at this stage, I don't think.
Okay, then let me read it out. That's probably faster than trying to copy and paste it. The SAP ILM license also needed to run your application.
Yes. Okay. So the ILM license, apart from if you are only using, and Steve can correct me on this one because he deals with the licensing a lot, the ILM licenses are applicable unless you are archiving GDPR specific information. Then I think there's a waiver on some of these licenses, if I'm not mistaken, Steve. Apart from that, yes, licenses do apply per system that you are archiving with ILM.
That's my understanding.
Then also, what I want to add onto this is there's ways and means to get around specific licensing for ILM. As TJC, we've got data archiving automation software, which is called ASC, Archive Sessions Cockpit. So we've got specific licensing packages for ASC. However, ASC mimics exactly what, in most cases, what ILM would do. However, at a fraction of the cost of the normal ILM cost, because together with ILM, one generally needs a secure store to archive all this information to, which would be open text or some other software that you'd need to also purchase together with the ILM solution. So there's a lot of extra cost that comes on top of it, and I think that's why a lot of companies shy away from purchasing ILM straight away off the bat.
Okay, thanks, Ruben. I don't see any other questions coming in, but I did have one myself, and it's more on the software side, less on the technology. And you mentioned that along the things that you need to consider beyond expertise, that also what I would probably call trust factor is an important one. So do you have any best practices that you can share with the audience on how you help the organization also to gain trust in, well, first of all, the solution, but also take that big leap into what I think for a lot is still an unknown?
Yeah, sure. So I think you mentioned expertise, but I think you mentioned it maybe in a different context. When we start with the data archiving project, so let me paint a scenario. You are considering implementing data archiving or ILM in your system. You get in contact with Steve. First port of call would be for us to do an analysis on your system. This, and I say different context, this is called in-house for us an expertise that is done on a person's system. So once we've done this expertise, this basically sets out the full plan project or a full plan for your data volume management that you need to implement on your system. So it's basically around 3 weeks that we spend on your system, analyze all the data. We go through your data volume management reports. We go on the system, check your largest tables, see your highest growth in your tables. If there's some specific data that also needs to be managed from a GDPR or tax perspective, then we look at that information, include all of this information into one document, which is called, or actually a few documents, but some documentation around the system. That's called the expertise. Once we've delivered that to you, it's up to you whether you would like to go ahead with the project, or you would like to perhaps try and do it in-house, or if you decide not to go ahead with the project. So I think that is a quite in-depth analysis, and for any client, I think that would be a good looking into showing or giving some confidence that the project will be delivered correctly.
Thanks, Ruben.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, it's a small piece of analysis which would justify a significant investment in archiving. So from the financial side, we'll be able to sort of show, table by table, object by object, why we're suggesting that you do certain things, where the quick wins are, and where that return on investment's coming from. But also from a sort of security point of view and a sort of a confidence point of view, we get to know the teams within your business, and we sort of interview those teams effectively to be able to sort of put together normally a sort of 50 or 60 page long report, breaking down in quite some detail, object by object, what you do, what the projected growth of those objects are, and obviously how we're going to do it. So by the time that's finished, the business has confidence that TJC is competent and that they also understand the reasons why we're suggesting they do what they need to do with their data. So it's sometimes, there's still an issue with the businesses having to convince certain people in certain departments that this is what needs to be done. But that comes more on the ILM side when you're talking about deleting data, and less on the archiving side when all you're doing is talking about sort of retaining the data but archiving it down and reducing that volume. So we've got the benefit, of course, of having worked with hundreds of companies. We've got reference companies that people can talk to. They can talk about what experiences other corporations have had. So we're able to get around those kind of things. But yes, it is a confidence and trust thing, and it's quite scary when you're talking about deleting data when you've never done anything like that before. And it's important for us to realize that a company can have those concerns and reservations, and we have to help them through that.
Looking at the, thanks Steve for detailing that out. Looking at the time, I see there was one, I think, a very simple question to close off with, which is, are there costs for the analysis, or is this free of charge?
The analysis, we usually just charge somewhere around sort of 8,000 or 10,000 euro for the initial analysis. And like Ruben said, that's such a detailed analysis. You get the full report, but then of course you can go and do what you want with that. It's not committing to a project at that stage. It's just paying for a piece of consultancy effectively. And so with that, if you've got a preferred partner that you might want to do some archiving with, and we've had companies that have done that, then you can use that report and you'll be able to target those objects. And we also do a sort of growth analysis. So we show you over the next 5 years how we can see those objects are going to grow. And of course that justifies doing sort of, either 3 objects or 23 objects. It depends sort of what the company needs to do. So it's a standalone piece of consultancy, and obviously, after we do that, we'd love to work with that company and do a project with them and partner with them for years ahead. But right back at the start, we do this consultancy, we do the right thing, and then that is yours to do with as you please. So yeah, that's the way we work. It's worked ever so well for us, our customers trust us. We've done the analysis and not taken customers on board because of it, not because of it, after it. But no, the vast majority of companies, because they get to know us well during that period of time, they have that confidence to talk to us about projects sometime after that. So yeah.
Thanks, and this brings us to the end of the presentation. Thanks a lot, Steve, for a very insightful presentation on how
that's my pleasure.
To support S/4HANA migrations with a reduced data set, and to keep that in a healthy state. Ruben, thanks for the answers to the questions. And
no problem.
On behalf of the audience, hope to see you in real life to answer some more questions and maybe do some consulting. Thanks a lot.